We are live streaming. شريهان ممكن أريج. Okay. The big boss is here.
Okay. We're getting out of this. There's always a technological glitch, which makes us superior to technology because we're humans. So I guess that's the upside. So anyway, I want to just make a small introduction, very, very short one, and give the floor to my wonderful ladies on this panel, ladies of letters. So good evening and welcome to the third panel in our series for revealing, recording, reflecting. It's a research project on women graphic designers from Southwest Asia and North Africa. I would like to start by thanking A to Z Presents for hosting our research lab and exhibition curated by Anya Lutz and myself, Huda Abi Faris. I would like to also thank our sponsors for their generous support, without which this project in its present form would not have been possible. So I start to thank the Khatwa Foundation, the Arab Fund for Arts and Culture, the Arab Council for the Social Sciences, and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Revealing, Recording, and Reflecting is a speculative research project on generations of women graphic designers from Southwest Asia and North Africa and the diaspora. And the project uses the exhibition platform as an editorial space to collect, reveal, retell, and record the work of and untold stories of women graphic designers, calligraphers, typographers, and illustrators, people who have played key roles in shaping and rethinking visual and material culture of the region. The main research team includes myself, Dr. Yasmin Nashabi-Ta'an, who moderated the previous panel 3 weeks ago, Dr. Bahia Shehab, who will be moderating tonight's panel, and Sukaina Hashem, who will be moderating the next panel in 2 weeks' time. Most importantly, as a team, as we, the researchers, the main researchers, we would like to thank all the researchers that have accepted our invitation to contribute to this collective research, and some of which are joining us on the panel for discussions and for sharing their work and their insights. And we are very grateful for their time and their presence. And we are very touched by their generosity. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Bahia Shehab and to introduce her panel and panelists. And I'm looking forward to hearing all about your insights, your questions, your knowledge, and what you're going to share with us tonight. So I wish you all an inspiring and enjoyable evening. And Bahia, the floor is totally yours now. Thank you.
Thank you, Huda. Thank you for initiating this project. It's an honor and a privilege to be working with this on you and the rest of the team. I think this is quite monumental for me in many ways, not as a continuity of the research, but also the importance of bringing these voices together tonight. So I would like to present to you our speakers. I don't want to list their bios, but I want to talk actually about my personal connection with each of them. I will start with Noha, and for me, Noha is a brilliant mind, a brilliant researcher, and we are always geeking over Arabic calligraphy with each other. And I find it, we can spend hours talking about a detail in a Quran, but to me, the depth of her knowledge in history and in manuscripts is really crucial to everything that we are working on in understanding the future. So Noha's input is essential in that sense. And also very specifically her research, her recent research on women calligraphers around the world, which is, I think, is going to be something, and it's going to shift the discourse. I'm really looking forward to that in that sense. Basma, I admired her work when she was brave enough to put together the book together with Don, and she reached out to so many artists and during the revolution. So to me, her huge effort in collecting data that was essential for us to understand the historic unfolding and actually preserve it. It's the only valuable, one of the very few valuable documents we have on the unfolding events. Also her passion about Arabic, what she's doing over there in Doha with her students, I'm following from across the sea in admiration and respect. Yara is, I don't have enough words to describe how much I admire Yara's work, because she's not simply a brilliant type designer who just won a TDC. Congratulations, Yara, on being recognized again. But this, to me, it's not the recognition actually, but the mentorship that she has been putting her heart into creating and educating and passing the knowledge on. So also what's special about this panel is that everyone here is not just a brilliant mind, but also an educator and a carer. So the knowledge that they gain, they actually pass it on. And it's going to be a very interesting conversation. Their bios are available on our websites. So without further ado, I will ask Noha to start with the first set of questions, presentation, and on the role of women calligraphers and patrons. Noha.
Thank you so much, Bahia. I'm quite humbled by what you said, and thank you for inviting me on this panel. It's very timely. It's a topic that we should be discussing more. And should be bringing to the forefront for academics and practitioners and artists and anyone who's interested in the form of the Arabic letter and its development, its history, what it means to us, how do we relate to it, and to understand that women were not women calligraphers, women participants in this art were not an accident to it. They were as crucial as men, and our histories and sources make this clear by simply not making a big fuss about, oh, look at her, she's a woman and yet she's doing this. Not at all. They treat them in the primary sources or the historians of each of the periods that we go through from the very beginning of Islam in the 7th century all the way to the 19th century as important as men. And so they give them the attention they give to men in the histories. They're not as many as men, but they're there. And I'm gonna begin by mentioning some of these women. We don't have examples to their work, but they're very important to bring about. And the first example we have is somebody called Al-Shifa. Her name is Layla. She was taught calligraphy by Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, and his brother Yazid, and she was one of the early converts to Islam, and she was crucial in teaching Muslim women Arabic because she had already studied and learned Arabic and the Arabic letter before Islam. And upon her conversion, this was more or less her vocation. And one of her students, for instance, was the daughter of one of the rightly guided caliphs, Umar ibn al-Khattab. And at the same time, she sets an example of, because all of these women, they're not just calligraphers, they're also educators. So it's fantastic. I mean, when you mention that, I mean, it is our duty, any piece of information we have to pass it on. And every single woman I'll be mentioning, this is exactly what she did. And this is why they're very important. It's the transmission of the knowledge. They taught calligraphy, and their students, some had male students who also taught calligraphy. So for instance, that was the example I gave was from early on in the 7th century. We move on, and in both worlds, so the Abbasid world, so the Eastern Muslim lands and the Western Muslim lands in North Africa, we have figures who were religious scholars and calligraphers, and at the same time you have figures who were singers and calligraphers. So you get both types, and the sources tell us about them. So we have this example, Fadl, two Fadls actually, one of them from the 10th century, one from the 9th century, one in North Africa and another in Baghdad. The one in North Africa, who was working in modern day Tunisia, I haven't seen the manuscript in person, and sorry, it's not there with the images, but the only available image wasn't that great, in this beautiful Kufi, very early script, And it's the earliest manuscript that we have calligraphed by a woman, and it's kept at the moment in Kairouan. It's mentioned, and for those interested, there's this quite, it's a cool book. It's in Turkish and English. It's done in the manner of what we call the tabaqat literature or prosopography, biographical information. So it might lack analysis, but it has immense information. All of the women I mentioned today are there. In addition to more of them, it has this little a picture for Fadl's Quran, and the book itself is prepared by a Turkish calligrapher. Her name is Hilal Kazan. She's I think she's still practicing. She's quite old now.
Noha, what's the name of the book?
Yeah, the name is Female Calligraphers Past and Present by Hilal Kazan. She's a very important calligrapher in the Ottoman tradition. She's had quite a few, actually many students, and because it is, I mean, she wanted to highlight what these women, I mean, she's not the first to produce such work. We have not a book, but an article that is 40 years old by a Baghdadi scholar, Dr. Zaima, who produced an article just detailing, again, in that biographical prosopography tradition of here's the name and that's a small biography extracted from the sources that we have for each period. She has fantastic examples in the book. Of course, most of them go to the Ottoman world, and this is the period that we have most surviving material and signatures for women. So back to the 10th century. That was a jump into the 20th century, a female calligrapher producing important work on her fellow calligraphers from early on. You get details that are very enticing because they're given attention, just like, again, when these historians speak of male calligraphers, the male calligrapher in that instance, it's his birthday, death date, who he studied with is given, and the same for the female calligraphers. But you also get a little bit more details if there's something peculiar. So we have an example here in Egypt, a woman who was living in Alexandria, and that was in Ayyubid, Egypt. So in the 13th century, to be more specific, 1226, and she was born with no arms. And the Sultan at the time, Al-Kamil, who was quite the erudite Sultan, was amazed. He couldn't believe it. And they brought her, and she looked at all the, the calligraphy pens they offered, the reed pens, like, I don't like any of this. She started using her feet, cutting up the reed, nibbing the tip of the pen, and produced her own folio of fantastic calligraphy, impressing everyone there. So you get these details, not because, oh, I'm mentioning this, she's a woman. No, because of something brilliant about how she executed her work, for instance. As we go on in time, of course, Ayyubid to Mamluk, but right before that, I'd like to bring in, which is something we're going to go back to eventually, like the patronage element, because we do have a calligrapher who was also a patron. And she was in Syria, in Damascus, related to the Seljuk household, so a major dynasty ruling all the way from Iran to Syria. Her name is Zumurrud bint Jawli. Her brother was, half-brother was a descendant of Seljuk sultans. She commissioned the beautiful madrasa, the Madrasa Khatuniya, in outside of Damascus city walls. And she also calligraphed these manuscripts. None of them survive, as far as we know. But this is what the historians say about her. They talk about how proficient she was as a calligrapher and as a designer for the letter. From her, jumping into a period that's my personal interest, the Mamluk period, Egypt and Syria, 14th to early 16th century. You get these examples, and I just want to mention that it is their capacity as educators, scholars, as well as calligraphers that the historians bring out to light, talking about them. So we have examples that you're actually looking at one right here of al Khair. Now, al Khair, she exists only in this manuscript. This manuscript is kept in Azhar Library. So to access it is, might not be the easiest thing. And we know from her signature that her father was a mukattib. This is his family name, his nisbah, his family name. So he must have taught her calligraphy if he were a calligrapher himself. Does she exist in the sources? Unfortunately not. So this is here where the manuscripts and the need to see, check, and access the manuscripts come in very handy with examining the sources. So I've given you all of these examples of these ladies who exist in the sources. One of them, yes, we do have an example in Qayrawan, but where are their productions? We haven't found them yet. I'm not losing hope because there's so much material hidden in libraries all around the world that we might actually bump into these works eventually. And at the same time, we have a bunch where we have examples of their calligraphy and how proficient they were, but they did not survive. It's a big question mark in the sources. And for that Mamluk period, it is the best period to study sources in because they have so many of them. We're very lucky. Those of us who specialize, or those of us who call themselves Mamlukists, we're very proud. Yes, we have everything in these books. We can find any piece of information. There's a plethora of material. And a lot about female calligraphers, especially from the 15th century. But we also have these examples. So al Khair bint Burhanuddin al-Mukattib, she must have been an illuminator as well, as often was the case with male calligraphers. Perfect naskh from the period. Once you start comparing what you're looking at here and the major school of naskh, of Egyptian naskh during that period, you see that she must have been trained by the highest, probably her father, but by someone of a very high skill, and she has projected that skill in the manuscript. We have other examples. This one is from the 15th century, from early on, from the 14th century. The one by Zainab al-Maqdisiyya. So Zainab al-Maqdisiyya is, her manuscript it's in the Museum of Islamic Art. It was on display for many years. It's been taken out of its display case to be restored, and it's going to make a grand appearance within a month or so. And Zainab al-Maqdisiyya in this amazing, really, it's one of the best examples of the script Rayhan that we have, Quran manuscript entirely in gold. We have a lot of information about her in the sources. And yes, there is this argument coming out now that this is not the same Zainab al-Maqdisiyya, the great scholar of that our sources speak often about, because she grew blind at the end and she could not have. This is neither here nor there. I've just mentioned an example of a calligrapher who used her feet to produce a fantastic piece of work. Now, Zainab al-Maqdisiyya is important because they speak about her as a scholar of hadith. So a scholar of hadith, or the tradition of the Prophet, is what actually links a lot of these calligraphers. So in their capacity as calligraphers, they are scholars of religious sciences, and they have students. And these students sometimes are male students. The great historian of the late 15th century, Khoury, who dedicates in his encyclopedia about people of the 15th century a volume to women. So much information about all sorts of, women in there, a lot of calligraphers, and you cannot really miss it. The calligraphers were scholars, were teachers. One of them was his own teacher. So there is this overlap between the transmission of the art and the transmission of a religious science. The religious science could be hadith, a tradition could be jurisprudence, but it also highlights, and this is why I'm fascinated by the Mamluk period, at how, and this was already mentioned before by Umayma Abu Bakr, who studies the muhaddithat and the faqihat in the Mamluk period, that these women, it's a double role. It's not a paradox, really, but basically they are not in the public space. So we don't get information as to she is the calligraphy teacher in the Madrasa Barquqiyya. She is a calligraphy teacher. She is a hadith teacher. Maybe in a home setting. Yes, it's a private setting. But she was taught by men who, yes, often is the case. You find that fathers, brothers, and not a single father who was also a scholar did not teach their daughters. So this was quite widespread. And those who were seen as have the potential and the talent became big names. Like a father we know taught his daughter calligraphy so that she can make a living eventually. But basically they were in that private space, but at the same time, they were as important as men in the transmission of knowledge. And in this case, of course, it's calligraphy. And Zainab al-Maqdissiyya, who died in her 90s, had so many. I can show you the list of men who studied with her and what is said about her. And of course, again, there will be a focus on the person's mannerism and behavior, which they do with male calligraphers, male muhaddithin as well. It's not just specific, oh, she was so graceful and so pious. They will describe men as such in those terms. We have, just going a little bit back in time, a very important figure for us, anyone studying calligraphers in history, with the chain of transmissions and who taught who, because that was very important for them to pass on this knowledge through a certain chain of transmission that will go eventually to Ibn Muqla. Of course, I understand there's no time now to go into who that person is, but let's say a very big family, two brothers, very big name in the Abbasid court, is responsible for the flowering of many arts. One of them is calligraphy, and all calligraphers try to link themselves to him through a chain of transmission, proving that they received that knowledge from that amud, or that pillar of calligraphy. So this woman, Zainab al-Shuhda, she is the link that we have. And Zainab al-Shuhda, she lived back in the 12th century in Baghdad. Her father she comes from a family where they produced or sold needles, so not a scholarly based family. And she is the most important teacher to a calligrapher. His name is Yaqut al-Nuri, who is crucial to the Egyptian change. So anyone who studied calligraphy in Egypt owes it to Zainab al-Shuhda. And in some stories, this will go back, and especially in Turkish literature, not as much the Arabic one, to the daughter of Ibn Muqla. So if Ibn Muqla is the base, because he perfected all of these scripts and he perfected the geometry behind them, they mentioned Dokhtari Ibn Muqla, Dokhtari as in daughter of, in Persian, Ibn Muqla, who probably taught the next major figure in line, Ibn al-Bawwab, in the history of Arabic calligraphy. So you have these women as the linking, the major linking points for the calligraphers, those who practice in the traditional manner until today. What you're looking at here is an example that is most probably on the left, Mamluk Fatma bint al-Hasan. We don't have any, again, no information. The Mamluk examples you're looking at here, Fatma bint al-Hasan, Amatul Aziz, only Zainab al-Maqdissiyya survives in the sources. They survive in these manuscripts because of their signatures. Next to her this is much later, Asma Ibrat Hanem. Now, the Ottoman world is filled with calligraphers in general, female calligraphers, of course. They specialized in many scripts, primarily Nasr. And Asma Ibrat Hanem, her father was a big figure in the Ottoman court in the late 18th century. She survived. She died in the 19th century, actually. And she eventually married her calligraphy teacher. She left quite a few signed examples. We have this, one of the slides show her Helia. So this is a panel. If we can, yes, right here on the left, this is a Helia. So a Helia, like in very, very briefly, eventually with the Ottoman world, for a calligrapher, male or female, to be granted permission to practice and to teach, they have to produce an ijaza. So it's a certificate, but they're producing their own certificate, whereby they show how proficient they are in the different scripts, and it has to be their own design. And this is an example by Asma Abrat Hanem. It's right now in the Istanbul University library. And the other example that you saw from her work is a Quran manuscript. Actually, this is in the Topkapi, and the Quran manuscript is in the Istanbul University library. It's very typical. The Naskh, the illumination, which she most probably produced as well, very typical of the period she practiced in the 19th century. Far and wide, you also have a Chinese example. We actually have quite a few Chinese examples, but the one I'm showing here, I think if there's a few folios scattered in different places. I think this example is in Kuwait. And I mean, you can figure out it's 17th century. We don't know anything about Nur al-Ilm, again, except her signature. Yani, Asma Abrat Hanem, who's right there. We know of her. Of course, this is an Ottoman calligrapher, survived in this Ottoman sources. Ottoman documents have so much information for us. But someone like Nur al-Ilm in China, we don't know anything about except for a design that is a mix of the Arabic letter and her own background. So when you get all of these examples from all the way, not just Eastern lands as in Central Asia or Iran, but China to North Africa, the example that is actually, it's not one of these, but in North Africa, I cannot not mention Durr al-Katiba. Now, there's this very important manuscript that we use to teach students of the history of Arabic calligraphy. You can see it online on the Metropolitan Museum of Arts Museum. It's produced by a male calligrapher, but the person who commissioned it was his, let's say, his nanny. It's called the Nurse's Quran. And he was taught by Durr al-Katiba, who's a very famous Andalusian calligrapher. So his teacher was a woman. The person who commissioned him was a woman of the court. And that woman of the court is not just as simple as she was the ruler's nanny. She must have, in my opinion, that ruler, his name is Mu'azz ibn Badis. He eventually wrote what we believe it's him, a booklet or a treatise on paints and how to use golden writing. It does make sense. You know, you put one and two together, it is because of her that he has gone into, not the other way around. It's not because the Zirid ruler is interested in calligraphy that the nurse, the nanny is in. No, it's her effect on him, and it's one of the best early manuscripts that we have. The Zirids ruled in North Africa. They ruled for some time on behalf of the Fatimids in Egypt. There's so much I can go on.
No, I'm going to I feel horrible. We want a
exactly
course, series, some books, some articles. Like these 15 minutes are not enough. So this is amazing. I can listen to you forever, but if I would like to just engage with Basma and Yara. So thank you so much, Noha. You're going to stay, as I'm going to be asking you also questions. But if Basma and Yara would like to reflect a bit on what you said, partly also these questions, I know they're a bit too wide, these questions, but maybe just a few ideas so that before we move on to a very important idea with Basma on archiving. And Noha, you already brought up the topic on accessing archives and who has the access to archive, but maybe Basma and Yara would like to reflect a bit on what they saw and what you said, and we can also again move forward.
Thank you, Noha. This was brilliant. I mean, yes, I agree with Bahia. I can listen to you for hours, and I think it should be structured into a course. And I'm your first student there. But something strikes me here that women seem to be the glue between calligraphers, sort of like stepping stones, not only stepping stones, but sort of the glue. And they are, and maybe I am mistaken, but there's a maternal feeling in passing on the knowledge also. Do you feel that?
Yes, I got that feeling from these few examples where they do operate as a linking point, and there's this maternal element and the passing of knowledge, because passing of knowledge is maternal. it's that the female aspect of being is the passing of knowledge, and it just made sense that they're calligraphers, they're also muhaddithat. So the word of the Prophet of Islam, I mean, the first transmitter is his wife, Sayyidah Aisha. So, and Shifa, the first calligrapher I mentioned, she was also a muhadditha. So you rely on women for this.
Yeah, it's historically, but also in many ways, you're right, Noha. Thank you. It's very insightful. Basma, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this concept of who is like the gatekeeper for remembering or bringing these women into the spotlight, and I think the book that Noha shared is absolutely fantastic, and the work that she's doing in mentioning these amazing examples that I feel aren't as discussed as the big names like, Ibn Muqla. We all talk about Ibn Muqla, but we don't really know that these like Yara so accurately described the glue that was holding them together. So I find it fascinating, but it also relates to the concept of archiving, which, I'm going to talk about a little bit. So maybe this is a good segue. Yeah, so I think I'm really interested in this concept of archiving and understanding this idea of gatekeeping and who has control over the transmission of knowledge and the dissemination of things that we archive. And I think these are two examples. I mean, these are my two books, Walls of Freedom and Khat. And they're both archival books that sort of document different aspects of Egyptian visual culture. One documents the street arts of the Egyptian Revolution, and the other one documents found calligraphy and typography in the landscape of Egypt, most cities of Egypt. And so I guess for me, I feel that the archive, it's important to position the archive as this thing that isn't just concerned with the past. And I think when Noha was speaking about this, I was thinking, wow, Noha speaking about this now in 2022, but this is a very old document or a series of old documents that she's discussing. And it reminds me of Derrida has this really interesting quote. He says the question of the archive is not a question of the past, but rather a question of the future. The very question of the future, question of a response, of a promise, and of a responsibility for tomorrow. The archive, if we want to know what this will have meant, we will only know tomorrow. And I thought, wow, so now as we're listening to Noha speaking, we're discovering this because someone has archived, and then someone has examined, and someone has analyzed, and someone has produced knowledge. And as a result, the archive is ever producing. It's almost like never ending. You can always find new meaning and new connections if you're digging through, right? And I think a lot of people tend to think of, well, we're excavating or digging through an archive, but really it's almost like we're weaving together, a tapestry of history, but almost projecting into the future. So I also want to bring up this concept of the positionality of the archive. So, and this is about gatekeeping also. Who controls it? How democratic is it? Who has access to it? And what is worthy of archiving? Because, a lot of, Noha's talking about really important components of the history of the calligraphic script. But, some archives deal with popular culture. Some archives deal, street art. It was always considered almost like an offense, right? But it's still worthy of archiving because every archive has a perspective and a story to tell. And so I think we've inherited also a lot of approaches and tools from colonialism. And as countries or as people of, that were colonized at a certain time, we can't help but go through these archives and these documents and these spaces that were created by, let's say Western governments, or Western colonizers. And I think we need to sort of, when we're archiving and looking at creating our own archives, we need to look at those biases and try and deconstruct them as well. There's a little story that I think might be interesting, not just in terms of archiving, but I think in terms of also the tools that Yara is going to talk about in the next section. And I find it really interesting because I think nowadays we tend to divorce Arabic from its content. Like as typographers or as researchers of Arabic, we don't always think about Arabic as, married to meaning, right? But I think it's so important for us to think about the two together. And I know we discussed this before as a group, but this is a little anecdote that I found in the amazing Yasser Suleiman. He's a professor of Arabic studies, and he wrote many, many books about the Arabic language. But it's in 1798, the Korean cleric and historian Abdurrahman al-Jabarti, he responded to a printed proclamation issued by the French colonizers upon their arrival in Egypt. So upon arrival in Egypt, Napoleon distributed several printed proclamations, and it was sort of a propaganda to gain support of the Egyptian population. And so the first set of proclamations were translated by, of course, the French Orientalists. So they have limited knowledge of the Arabic language, and they have certain tools, and of course, certain typographic tools that they're using, and a certain script that they're using that they've developed. And even though the printed messages were quite new to Egypt at the time, they were still met with outrage and ridicule by Muslim clerics. So in his historical account of the events, al-Jabarti reproduces the text in its entirety and then proceeds to deconstruct and analyze it, listing the morphological, syntactic, semantic, stylistic mistakes that it contains.
Amazing.
So, yeah, it is amazing because in this example, I feel like al-Jabarti was not just critiquing the content, he was also critiquing the form of the Arabic. And he was pointing out these stylistic, but also morphological mistakes, which I think is such a beautiful example of sort of the marriage of language and script. And this is why I feel it's important to look at archives in a new way and approach the study of the Arabic script in a new way, rather than, we all know the wave of sort of typographic matchmaking, and we want, the Latin and Arabic to kind of be balanced, and that's fantastic. But I think we're in a new era. We're almost in a new renaissance of the Arabic script, where we really want Arabic to be Arabic, and we're sort of digging through archives and trying to kind of bring back, or maybe I would say reincarnate in a way, some of those older scripts and approaches to the language, and then produce them in a contemporary way, which I think is absolutely fantastic. There's so many examples of type designers. I mean, Yara is of course one of them, but there's so many examples of type designers women type designers too, who are actually doing this. And this is why I think the archive is so important. So there have been a lot of examples and a lot of individuals, organizations who have been approaching archiving in a very new way. Now, let's leave the inaccessible archives of our various cities, that many of them are mediated by governments and inaccessible, like Dar al-Wasa'if is one of them. For example, it's really difficult to navigate spaces like that because of, again, the very bureaucratic processes of these spaces. So designers and organizations have resorted to things like social media, and my book, Walls of Freedom, started on social media. So the graffiti of the Egyptian Revolution began on social media. It was collected on social media. And even our approach to the book and archiving the street art was about talking to all these different photographers and all these different artists through social media and collecting work and trying to make it a participatory effort. So you have so many examples that are using, let's say, primarily, I would say, Instagram and Facebook as an archiving platform. There's of course a lot of amazing people that I can mention. One of them that I recently met is Salma Sirri, who is looking at specifically food culture in the SWANA, and she's looking at archiving old Arabic cookbooks, which is absolutely fantastic. And she has the platform Sofra Kitchen, so check her out. Another amazing group of archivists who I also recently met are the Lumen Council. They are Mobius Studios, and they are making the archive of all archives. And they're sort of doing it on Instagram as well, but they're going to create a platform that isn't tied to Instagram. And they've been navigating a lot of issues with copyright and what can we, use and take and archive and who owns the copyright. So there's a lot of things that are, I would say, tangles and knots that we're trying to untangle as we're approaching this new, I would say, area of archiving. And I would like to know, or I want to maybe ask the audience, is Instagram a feasible platform? Is it okay to use Instagram? Who controls Instagram? Instagram and Facebook, who controls them? Could things be censored there? I had a little anecdote about censorship that happened on a platform like that. So is that the tool? And if that's not the tool, how can we think about designing new tools? How can we think about creating new tools for archiving that could allow designers to access these archives, even just from a search perspective? How do you search Instagram? If you're trying to find a very specific sample or a very specific aspect of a script, how do you search that space? So there's a lot of questions that we can talk about, and maybe I'll leave it.
Actually, that leads greatly to Yara's tools, and but also, Basma, I just have one comment about what you said. I think the revolution was a great experiment for our part of the world to be like directly pushed into the digital humanities by force. Even though it has been a developing field for the West, and the concept of archiving digitally, the Library of the Congress has been collecting memes for 20 years for its archive. So I think what happened is now with the digital humanities, we are using available freely, quote unquote, available platforms as documentation tools. And here you forgot to mention Type Arabic, that I'm very proud of, and that I'm super looking forward to see what's going to the projects that you are developing. And I will be raising the points more about how can we connect these conversations, have more of these conversations like we're having now. But I will have Yara move on because we're running out of time, and I want us to reflect on everything together. I'll have Yara move on to her a set of questions, and maybe we can also support her with reflecting on what are the tools for designers. Yara, as a designer educator, and the passer on, a social glue and the passer on of knowledge. How do you see?
I want to comment on what Basma was saying also, because I wanted to talk about that too, and archiving our present, which becomes the past, but through Instagram and the social media. I remember a time when we used to look at books as references, and this was the archive for us, or what we go back to. And it had a much less effect of standardization and homogenization, or let's say gentrification. But now with Instagram and this instant gratification of visuals with no background information, this mushrooming of archival accounts, they're candy for the eye, that they seduce the designer, they seduce all the eyes, and somehow we are a growing Arab typophile. There's a typophile everywhere, and even who's not a designer is becoming a typophile somehow, right? Anyway.
Yeah,
so,
but I see
so
that as a
true.
positive thing, actually.
yes.
Now, yeah, it's actually a positive thing, and it's now, this is, I will push that point till later, because I see that the opportunity and how we can bring that together. But first, I mean, if we can talk about, what do you think of the tools for you as a type designer, and you've transitioned through the different mediums and the different tools of using. So what do you, who has control of these tools, and how can we or has this been reversed? How do you feel about that?
I mean, the tools for Arabic type design are also different than typography and using type. So the tools have changed. I remember a time when I was using Fontographer, and then moved on to FontLab, and then moved on to VTT for vaulting on Microsoft for free, like a free software tool. And then FontLab again with its new additions that inserted Python into it. And then came Glyphs, which is much more commercially available and widely spread and easier to use. And now we're at this point for the tools. But in terms of access and accessibility, let's say, everybody has access to these tools of designing typefaces. But accessibility is another story. I think that there's an economic accessibility on both the level of affording a new type design software, or affording to dedicate a whole year or 2 years for its study in a European university, let's say. So these are economic factors that go into the accessibility. Another level that hinders accessibility, for example, I have noted on the discussion forums, is the language. Type design softwares are all developed in English, and the discussion on the forums is conducted in the English language, which means that any deficiency in the language itself can amount to a deficiency and a short breadth in exploring those software. Here appears an obvious gap. I mean, this is a good opportunity for type developers and computer scientists to develop a tool that is made catered for the Arabic script and is written in the Arabic script. And we have, I think, discussed the catering for the Arabic script extensively over many forums and many discussions, so I won't go there. So when it comes to accessibility, also you're talking about the language and the bodies that are policing the language. This was one of the questions that was in the list. So I think big tech companies are policing the language, and any policing agent is either politically or economically driven, basically. So for example, in an attempt to understand the policing agency in the performance of Arabic type, Lina Ghaibi, Wasim Haj from Computer Science, and Khajak and myself are now involved in an incubator research project on Arabic type's performance in the digital realm. We agree that on the basis that the basic DNA of the Arabic script, that its connectedness is foreign, or for better words, is in conflict with the available software. For example, attempt to set a type, Arabic type, on a curve in the script and watch what happens. Can you imagine Arabic type on a curve? So, so the project's aim is to build a body of research that puts forward the nuclei for a center of research of activities related solely to the study of Arabic type and typography. So that's
we need this right now, Yara. We need it
yeah,
right
it takes
now.
time.
Right now.
You see, research takes a lot of time, and
we wanted Instagram style.
Yeah, that's another story.
Noha is smiling. Noha has a very wide smile. She knows that's impossible. Yeah. So okay, I think very briefly, Huda is asking, can you elaborate on why a software in the Arabic language could make designing an Arabic font easier?
I just said that I was really noticing on forums of discussion for, let's say, Glyphs or any other type software, so many type designers who are Arab that do not speak the language. So they have to learn English to ask questions also. If they know how to navigate the interface, it's something, but to actually ask questions and delve into the details of type design, they have to ask the questions in an English and then get the answer in English. And you can feel sometimes how the answer, the English is not proficient, and they are struggling with the language to understand it. And while they're designing a script that is Arabic. So this is where I noticed that gap somehow.
Yeah, in the meantime, I would like to apologize to the almost 450 million Arab-speaking people in the world who do not have access to the talk we are having right now. So
exactly, every time we talk about Arabic type, we're speaking in English.
In English.
But it's fine. It's also accessible to everybody else. But I mean, we tend to forget that there are people, and we take it for granted that there are people who do not speak the language.
Yeah, so I'll use that idea to move on to these were we wanted to talk about calligraphers and accessibility and the passing of knowledge, but I'll come back to that before the Q&A. Maybe we can reflect all on that. Basically, I'm interested in the future of Arabic, not just like Noha talked about the manuscripts, Basma talked about archiving, and Yara talked about the tools. And I think our role again as educators is to pass on this knowledge, but also make sure that it is preserved for the future. And mentioning the language issue is exactly why I started Type Lab a few years back. We had this really, these are all available online for anyone to access them and watch them. But to me, what was really important was the drawback that I faced in the History of Arab Graphic Design book, is that even though we had the funding, we had limited time, but because of that constraint, we couldn't find the women. And the women needed more time and a slower pace because you needed to dig deeper. And the male designers were much easier to find because their networks are stronger, they're more present in the work field. But now I'm left with a list of names of women designers who I feel responsible to document. And from that sense of fear, I felt like, okay, I can't get the past right now, but I can at least take a screenshot of the present. And this is why we on Type Lab, we started the Ladies of Letter, which is now, thanks to Huda, developing into a whole, like beyond my dreams come true, because now we have a chance to actually document these stories and create a publication for other people to read, even those who don't have Instagram. So I think now this is, everything is communicated in Arabic first and then English. And this is a growing community of people who care, love, and share Arabic letters. And what I'm hoping for in the future is with what Yara is doing in Beirut and what Basma is doing in Doha, is that we can start creating these silver lines connecting like a web, like small spiders weaving in the night, whereby we can continue these conversations, but also our concern for the development of the Arabic script and its future and its past. So these are some of the very few names we have documented so far in our research for the book of Arab women designers who are still alive, some of them very young, producing, and Iranian. So we're not just focusing on the Arab world, we're looking at SWANA in general, and there are a few examples of amazing type and lettering designers and designers from Iran who we will be documenting and looking at. But to me, the takeaway from this conversation is that this is only the beginning of not just the conversations on women designers, but our conversations on type design and letters and calligraphy and history and the future in general. So I would like to hear from the three of you actually of how would you how would you look at the future of Arabic calligraphy and typography, and how can we bridge this gap? So if each of you can reflect briefly on that with me, I would be grateful.
Should I go?
I think Noha should start because she's been
Okay.
quiet for a very long time.
Yeah, no likes to speak. Well, especially since you've mentioned we're all educators and
mothers.
And yes, that's true. So from my standpoint, I would start with guaranteeing or making it possible to digitize as much as possible from those archives that are completely accessible or inaccessible libraries, but making this available to the student. Making it available to the student through digitization efforts, big projects, or through personal effort as educators. And making sure that these students are aware of the importance of this for their own identity. For them to feel a connection and be proud that what was there before. How does this go centuries back? What does it mean that it goes centuries back? How is it important that there are roots that go all the way to the 7th century to this? To guarantee that a future whereby these students will actually be well-rooted in whatever it is they're working on producing, and are fully aware of how their identity fits in and proud.
Okay, beautiful. Yara?
I want to also connect with the present and where we are now. And I'm thinking about the calligraphy, all the beautiful manuscripts that Noha was showing. And let's talk about the last 20 years. Our fascination with calligraphy and our production of type is much higher. A lot of typographic work, books, design work has been coming out. But I think there is much more growing interest in sitting back, taking a deep breath, processing what has been done, contemplating a little bit, evaluating even the processes that we were working with, and putting a context to how we were working, and for the work that is still being produced. I think designers need to really think beyond getting the job done at this stage. It's not only just getting the job done. We really need to, what are the consequences of getting the job done? And what have we done to the future of designers when we are producing this work now? And how are we actually, we're copying the designers before us and still copying somehow, and how the design that was done before us has actually shaped us, and how what we're doing will shape the next generation. So take, for example, punctuation. I'm really interested in punctuation. I'm designing a typeface, and I want نصف فاصلة. And really, there's a question, هل نصف الفاصلة? When you ask questions like semicolon, يعني, okay, where does that come from? And is it something that is very far and foreign to the Arabic script? And why should I even put it there in the typeface, for example? So we put it there because of the way that we write and we read. And this has come from where? So taking that point only of punctuation, I was thinking, is it a comma on the top and the dot? And is it a comma facing the text before it? And most of the typefaces actually have it comma downward, for example. And it is these questions that I want to sit down and really think about them before delving into more design. It's enough. I mean, we've designed enough. We can continue designing, of course. This does not stop, but I want to look at these calligraphic features. So, for example, there are features that are, okay, designers, actually, type designers, work laboriously into embedding variants in their typefaces. But I don't see type designers and graphic designers using these variants, other than its stylistic formalistic usage. Okay, so you do not see see a calf variant between a different widths of calf as something that you could see for use for justifying a line of text, and this is in line with what Titus Nemes was actually researching. So these sorts of ideas are not inherent in the way we work, because we do not understand that a calf that is wide has a different distribution of sawad u bayad.
Yeah.
And will give a completely different black and white, and will completely have a different impact and texture on the page. So these are the things I think we should start looking for.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I have a couple of things to add. I got really excited by what Yara was saying. I think there's two things that really, I think what she said was two things that really stood out to me. One is the last thing she said about, people, designers, they add, different stylistic alternates to their, type design, but, designers don't use them. And I get frustrated also with my students, but, we've inherited the tools. So we're using Adobe tools, and Adobe tools, you need to open the panel, the flip out panel, and you need to look into the ligature panel. And then it's a process, and it's not seamless, and it needs a couple of steps. And I feel a lot of times students at least my students are trying to make a deadline and okay, we're not going to worry about that. But this is the thing. I mean, if we had tools that were designed to naturally do this, or tools that were designed for this language, I think that would be amazing, rather than we're inheriting these tools that are designed by Western letter forms. The other thing, which is very related and connected and also frustrates me as an educator, is related to what Noha was saying, at least for me, I'm one of very few Arabic speaking professors at VCU Arts Qatar. So there's I'm the only one that teaches Arabic typography. So, and we've inherited a curriculum. We're a Western institution in an Arab country, and so we are using a curriculum that was created for a Western student, right? And so, we can say decolonized design, we can say that all we want to say it, but unless there is systemic change, right? Unless something really has to change at the core, we're going to continue to be battling against the current, swimming against the current. I can offer an elective on Arabic type design, and maybe I get 5 students interested, right? But this is the thing, how what Noha was saying, giving or trying to have students be proud of their language, be proud of their history, be proud of their heritage. How do we do that? It's difficult. When you're one person.
I can give tips.
Enthusiasm is one of it. It's very porous. Enthusiasm,
exactly.
Yes.
And living in Cairo.
But I want to comment on something actually. There's a difference. I noticed that there's a big difference because I have been teaching for the past 25 years on education, on the comment of education, and typography courses on all levels. And I feel that there's the difference between teaching Latin type and Arabic type. And look at that difference, I think. There's a short-sightedness approach to teaching Latin type. We begin with anatomy. We tell this is the baseline, this is the X height, and this is the ascender, descender, khalas. And this is to distinguish between the styles from modernist to whatever. And then we tell them this is the strokes, this is the style, and that's it. And this is very reductionist, and it's confusing to the student a little bit. On the other hand, when I am teaching Arabic typography, and this is self-learned, and this is just my instinct, and by using your head on how to get around it, I always start with calligraphy. And these are some of the the images that you showed. That was Ali Asi teaching calligraphy sessions for our type students, typography 1, which is fundamental type, not even type design, and for our 4th year students who are doing type design. So when you start with the calligraphy, the student actually understands the different forms, the parts of the letter, where they come from, how does the act of writing lend itself to the shape, and eventually, how does that transform to type? So I think this is a big, for me, a big difference between this is Latin, and now I can feel that the students actually understand Arabic type more because they understand Arabic calligraphy much more.
Very nice, Basma. It's but I see the struggles that you are facing working within a curriculum that is like parachuted on, and the question of identity comes in maybe because the curriculum I developed for Cairo, it was based on Western curriculums, and it is at an American university. But then in the content, you can always change a little bit. You can always shift the syllabus, move assignments around, have them go to a museum, have them go to a production house, you know, there are always things that you can expose them. I'm sure Yara can share a lot on that. But I think, yes, so I think our time for the conversation is, I think we should hold the conference soon, ladies. So yeah, this is not the end of me. You're gonna see more of me dragging you into conversations. But I would like to open the floor to our attendees. So I would like to thank our speakers for their kind interventions, and I will ask our audience if you have any questions for our speakers. Oh, I have a question from Maha, how to start and practice Arabic typography. Yara, would you like to answer that question?
Read it, speak it, and then design with it. I mean, the only way to practice is to design it. And there's a big difference between type design and using type. So you don't have to design the type because that takes a lot of time, but you can design with the type. And this is where I think our understanding should become much deeper on understanding how to use the type, because we've had enough, it's never enough, but I mean, we have quite a good collection of typefaces now.
So Maha, Yara's advice is start using and playing with the fonts maybe, or what you have access to, and then that would probably lead you into practicing Arabic typography. Okay, and yes, saying for everyone in Berlin, you are welcome to visit the Research in Progress exhibition, and it's I think it's running until mid-May. So okay, do we have other questions? I think there were a few questions in the beginning that we did not answer. I will go back to some of them until someone in the audience builds up the courage to ask a question or reflect with us on it. I think it was, yeah. I think it's, let me see. Yeah, this one we've answered. So if anybody has any questions to our speakers, or any of the speakers, if you would like to give us a final thought or a final reflection.
Okay.
There's a question.
No, you're getting compliments now that people are like starting to realize. Laureen, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. She's saying, dear all, this was the most inspiring and amazing panel I've seen in a while. Congratulations for your work and looking forward to more. How can I share this with my students? Oh, we will be posting the talk on the Khat page and on the Instagram page, and it's live streamed on YouTube, and it will also be saved and hopefully all this knowledge will be transcribed and, you know, edited and glued together in a book that we will hopefully be publishing by next year with Khat. So hopefully you can even share a book with your students. Maha's saying that, okay, we should go out with students to exhibition. Yes, Maha, I agree. We love field trips. Noha and myself, we both studied with a professor who was who loved Cairo and who took us all over Cairo. So I think we passed this on to our students because we got it from Bernard. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I wouldn't like to leave any unanswered. Okay, so
I want to comment a bit on student relationships and education and how, because because I've been teaching for the past 25 years, I've had the privilege of actually having students become my own colleagues and sometimes even my teachers.
Nice.
Which I'm really proud of.
Nice. I think I feel like we learn from our students and as much as they learn from us in a way. I'm not sure about Noha because Noha can teach everyone on the planet.
So I'm constantly learning from them.
But I think it's, to me, students are also, in as much as I teach them and as much as I learn from them too. But Yara, I can't imagine your feeling like having your students actually growing up and becoming worldwide established, known designers all over the world who come back to you. It must be a very like a gratifying feeling.
Yeah, I'm learning from them now. I'm at the stage now.
You're very lucky.
I think the best feeling, it's the best feeling in the world when you have taught a student and then you see them excel at something and then come back and work with you or you know, I mean, I feel this way about Maha, who, you know, she went to VCU Qatar and then, you know, she is one of the amazing women on your list. Yes. And she's working with us on typography and I learn from her every day. And it's just it's like watching I know we're mothers, so it's okay. Yes. Watching your child grow, right? This is how it feels like.
I know. It's an amazing feeling. Okay, with this amazing feeling, I would like to thank our speakers. I would like to thank our audience for being there, for listening, for tuning in. I would like to remind everyone of our next panel, Image Making Behind the Lines of Engaged Graphic Design. It's with Sukaina. It's going to be on Thursday on April 28th at 8 p.m. Berlin time. Our exhibition space in Berlin is unfolding. Every day we add more and more material to it. You're more than welcome to join, to visit, to share, to document, to feed us information or stories that you have about women in and from the region. So we look forward to your visiting and suggestions. This is, again, a project that was initiated by myself, Anya, and Huda, and the exhibition runs until the 19th of May. And these are the addresses, and you can find more information on the A to Z website. And we would like, again, to thank all of our supporters, Khat Foundation, Arab Fund for Arts and Culture, ACSS, the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and A to Z Presents. And with that, I will thank you all. Again, Noha, Basma, and Yara, I am so grateful for your time. I am so grateful that you exist. And I can't wait until we create more and more conversations, conferences, books, and collaborations together.
Thank you. Thank you, Bahia.
Thank you so much,
This
Bahia.
has been amazing.
Thank you so much.
It has been. It's been wonderful.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a lovely
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.